Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. We have folks here in the office in three different classrooms. No one logged in it looks like some folks are joining in from home too. So I will get us started. Let me also make sure you have access to sharing your screen. Do you need any help tech-wise?
I do not think so.
Okay. All right. Well, hello everyone who's here. Before we start today, I want to let you know that we will be recording this presentation so that folks that can't join us can watch this important information later. We'll also be sharing the recording with you so that you can rewatch at home. You'll hear a lot of important information today, and you will not understand all of it. Even I won't understand some of these legal terms. We encourage you to rewatch the video and follow up with us to ask questions about vocabulary and concepts. We have a lot of information to share, and we hope to have a little time at the end to answer clarifying questions. Brooke and Stephen will not be answering any questions about your personal situations. That's better suited for a private, confidential conversation with our lawyer friends. So thank you for keeping your audio off and your camera off. Like I said, we are recording. Thank you so much for joining us here at Mid-State Literacy Council. To those of you in the office, those of you at home, thank you to Brooke and Stephen for joining us. My name is Bridget Schell, and it's a true pleasure to introduce Brooke Elmi and Stephen Antwine, two Philadelphia lawyers who will be sharing information about workplace and immigration rights today. Brooke Elmi is a partner at Gelfenberger LLP, where she helps people who are hurt in accidents, including products liability, construction accidents, premises liability, and automobile accidents. Brooke she provides compassionate legal advocacy for injured clients to help them restore dignity and security after a serious accident. She's fluent in Spanish and conversant in Portuguese. Stephen Antwine has been practicing immigration law for over 12 years and has helped many people from many countries navigate their legal status, including students here at Mid-State Literacy Council. He has extensive experience in federal litigation, deportation defense, and family-based immigration. He currently serves or manages the immigration-based federal litigation practice at Green and Spiegel, and assists families and individuals with all USCIS and Department of State processes. Stephen is fluent in Spanish and conversant in Russian. So with that, take it away, Brooke.
Great. Thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Ash, and thank you all for being here. We truly appreciate it and look forward to speaking with you. I am going to hopefully share my screen. Okay. As Bridget said, I'm a personal injury attorney in Philadelphia. I represent people who have been hurt in accidents, primarily in product liability matters. But for purposes of today, I want to go over just kind of getting familiar with what that means, when you might want to contact a personal injury lawyer, and what kind of situations might arise where you may want to seek legal advice. And then I will turn it over to Stephen, who has a completely different practice from mine in immigration law. Okay. So as you may know or have encountered or have heard, people can get hurt in their workplace. There are various hazards that can present, whether that's an unsafe piece of equipment or some sort of unsafe condition. That could be even, water on the floor that's been left there that causes somebody to slip and fall. And people also develop diseases, conditions related to exposure to certain chemicals or substances. And then there's also injuries that can occur from certain repetitive movements like lifting or uncomfortable positions while working that can lead to injuries over time. So one of the systems that exists for compensating injured workers is workers' compensation. At its core, workers' compensation is a type of insurance, and every employer is required in Pennsylvania to have this insurance. Under that system, and I apologize, there is some construction going on in my building right now. So under that system, it's no fault. That means that it does not require that the employer was negligent and caused you to be injured. And by the same token, it does not take into account whether somebody might have done something wrong or careless that brought about their injury. What is required is that the accident happens in the course and scope of employment. So at your workplace, doing your job, in simple terms. And under that system, if those qualifications are met, workers' compensation insurance covers a portion of your wages if you miss a certain amount of time from work due to your injuries, and it also covers the cost of your medical treatment resulting from that injury. And that is both for injuries as well as occupational illnesses like exposure to chemicals that cause a medical condition. Just a general overview of what that process is like. It's essentially should be automatic, where if a workplace injury is reported, a claim should be opened. At that point, your employer has 90 days to open and accept the claim or deny the claim based on their determination. If an injury happens at work, there's 120 days to give notice. That notice can come from your employer, but also can come from the employee who makes the report of the accident. And so that's important that if you do have a workplace accident, to make sure that you report it to your employer, to your manager. If an employer denies the claim or fails to open and accept the claim, you can, on your own, file a workers' compensation claim at that point. Your medical treatment generally has to be by a doctor that is approved by your employer or the workers' compensation carrier, and your employer has a responsibility to then list those approved medical providers in a public place at work where people can see it. If not, you may be able to see a different doctor of your choosing. If you have a reported workplace accident and you are not receiving payment for wages after missing significant time, or your employer is not covering your medical bills, that's a good time when you might want to contact a lawyer to figure out what types of claims or rights you may have. So in general, whether you are an immigrant, non-US citizen working in the United States, you are also entitled to workers' compensation, assuming those other conditions are met. There may be some limitations if you have no work authorization. However, even then, your medical bill should be covered, and it's essentially a defense that can be raised, but would be the employer's burden to prove that you did not have workers' authorization. I've seen plenty of cases where people have received benefits, and so it's not an automatic disqualifier, and employers can also essentially elect not to raise that defense or explore that issue. So don't assume that that's a complete barrier to receiving those benefits. It is not, and it may not be a barrier at all. Now, these are just a couple of things that come up, and which I've seen as being barriers to people seeking legal advice, going to a lawyer, or looking to exercise the rights they have. And some of those are just a fear of causing trouble at the workplace or retaliation, assuming that you don't have a case based on your own evaluation and without consulting a lawyer. And sometimes there's a general distrust of lawyers based on past experience or what they've heard or seen out there in the world or on film. There's a few things to be aware of would be if you have an injury at work and your employer tells you there's no insurance or there's nothing they can do, that can be a red flag. Sometimes that's said, but not true, whether it's an intentional misrepresentation or something that is just said incorrectly. You don't have to accept that as being necessarily the case. There may, in fact, be insurance. Sometimes it's complicated. Um, Another red flag would be if an employer asks you specifically not to get a lawyer involved, tells you they'll take care of it, not to worry. What happens sometimes is those promises don't come through in the end, and then that person has missed out on an opportunity to for very important medical bills to be paid and wage loss to be paid through the system. Um, if you have questions, if you find yourself in these situations, you should definitely reach out to an attorney who can advise you. They can investigate whether there is workers' compensation coverage available. They can evaluate your claims and let you know what your rights and options are, regardless of whether you go on to choose to hire that lawyer. That relationship is confidential, and everything you share with an attorney is also confidential. So outside of workers' compensation, there's also the potential that you could bring a lawsuit. Now, lawsuits are people in the United States. You have access to the courts. You have the right to bring a lawsuit, access the civil legal system here, regardless of your immigration status or whether you are a citizen. Um, an employer, your direct employer is immune. This is in Pennsylvania. Your direct employer is going to be immune from a personal injury lawsuit. That's basically the exchange that's set up under workers' compensation. They have to provide that no-fault coverage for your injuries, and in return, they are immune from a civil lawsuit. That being said, there may be situations where you nonetheless could pursue a lawsuit against a third person that was responsible for causing an injury to you. In addition to workers' compensation benefits, you might also be entitled to receive. If, for example, you are driving in a company car that is hit by another vehicle, certainly you could still pursue a claim against the driver of the vehicle if they caused the accident. Another example would be if you're hurt at work by a defective piece of equipment or machine, you may have a case against the manufacturer of that equipment in what's known as a product liability case. And why that is important is because workers' compensation covers a portion of your wages. There's a preset calculation, but not all of the lost wages that you might have from being out of work. And it does cover your medical expenses, but it does not reimburse you or compensate you for other damages. Term you may have heard like pain and suffering, that's not included in what's covered by workers' compensation. With any of these types of situations, whether it is a car accident, a workplace injury, if you have questions for a lawyer or think you need to or are thinking about pursuing a claim, it is important to act quickly. There are legal time restrictions on bringing any type of legal claim. That'll depend on the state law that controls or whether it's federal law. In any case, it always makes sense to act quickly to make sure that you can preserve your rights. Just to go over some kind of terminology, because as lawyers, as Bridget alluded to earlier, we use words differently. It's a big part of becoming a lawyer is really learning a vocabulary. And why that's important is because the way we use words in our professions, and that's different for me than it is for Stephen, they have different meanings and they have very specific meanings. And often when we are saying a word or a certain term, we're actually referring to an entire legal standard. So one of those words I just wanted to call out is a disability. The way we might use that word in everyday conversation is different. In fact, it is truly a legal term, but it is also has various meanings depending on the circumstance. You may have heard of Social Security disability. That's a federal system of payment that might be available to people who are unable to work due to any type of medically determined condition, whether that's psychological or physical disability. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is another set of standard for determining disability, where an employer may then need to provide you with a reasonable accommodation based on your recognized disability. That can be somebody who is hearing impaired, vision impaired, and a whole host of other types of conditions that could qualify. Again, best to consult with a lawyer on that because it is a legal test. And then there's also short-term disability and long-term disability you may have heard of. Those are insurance programs as well, ones that you can either have as benefits through your employer that they might provide, or that you may have purchased on your own. And those are maybe available to cover some of your expenses if you are hurt or have some sort of medical condition that requires you to be out of work. And then there's disability as it's defined under workers' compensation. In that context, what that truly means is just the payment of lost wages. One of the reasons this matters and why I'm going over it is because those legal definitions, they do matter. We've covered them. I just covered them in very general terms. But if you were to, for instance, go into a search engine or AI and type in your question, the results you get is not necessarily going to reflect that whole scope of potential meanings. And unless you know the questions to ask, right, that's also a part of why you may not get reliable information trying to rely on the internet, and what the value of seeking out legal advice is, because an attorney should know the law that applies and what questions to ask to figure out what law applies. Another common type of situation where people may have an injury, most people have known somebody who has, would be a motor vehicle accident. And those can involve, two cars that get in an accident, as well as somebody who's a pedestrian walking who gets hit by a car in a crosswalk. If you are on a bicycle and hit by a car, and if you are in a car, whether you are driving or a passenger. A couple things to be aware of in Pennsylvania. Every insurance policy that's issued in Pennsylvania is required to have a minimum of $5,000 in medical coverage or personal injury protection insurance. That's available to you, if it's your insurance policy, to pay up to $5,000 in initial medical treatment. So if you're in a car or you're in your car and you're injured, you have to open what's called a PIP claim, and then that will cover your initial medical expenses. You have to open the claim for that coverage to be available, and then it's automatic, and it's also a no-fault system like the workers' compensation system. I think sometimes people are afraid to even open up a PIP claim under if they've been hurt in an accident. It will not make your rates to go up, and you have to do it otherwise to get that medical treatment covered under your plan. And ultimately, the downside would be you could have alternatively be stuck with thousands of dollars medical bills that would otherwise be covered under insurance under your plan. You may also have a claim against another driver who caused an accident and caused you to be injured. In many cases, those motor vehicle legal claims can settle or resolve in compensation for the injured person without ever filing a lawsuit, and certainly without going to court. And that's the majority of the time that is the case. However, the system is a little different than you might think. It's not just that the other person who's responsible for causing the accident is automatically or immediately going to start paying your medical bills as you get them. You have to bring a claim. You have to prove what your medical treatment was, that your injuries were related to that accident, and establish that with documentation in order to recover what would essentially be a lump sum at the end or once your claim is processed by the other person's insurance. Um, a lawyer, again, can assist with that process, as well as advising you on the value of your claim. Many times after an accident, an insurance company may reach out, may make an offer, and they may use different terms and not make it very clear that you are actually settling your claim. They may say, oh, we can cover your medical expenses. How's $300? Be careful with these because that insurance company is not they may be offering you less than what they actually feel that your claim is worth, and want to put pressure on you to accept a lower offer before you can hire a lawyer. If you have any doubts or questions in that situation, again, you can contact a lawyer who can advise you on whether you have a potential legal claim um, against that driver. Just some basic takeaway advice. If you have a workplace accident, report it to your employer, the person in charge. Same goes for if you fall at a store and you're hurt, certainly make a report of it if you can. Um, Obviously, the first priority is getting medical treatment when you need it. However, reporting and documenting what happened is always important. If you're asked to make a statement or sign a statement about something that's happened to you where you've been injured, make sure that it's accurate, be as accurate as possible. Uh, and if you're asked to sign a written statement, make sure you read it before you sign it. These types of statements can impact your rights later, so it's important to make sure that what you're signing is what you've actually said. You can ask for a copy of that report in the moment. If you've reported something, ask them if they can make you a copy to take with you. Take a photo to document, again, if you can, what it was that caused your accident or the accident scene. Same goes for an accident involving a car. Get the other driver's name, their insurance information, and note any information you can about their car, the license plate number, the color of the car, the model, the make, and take a photograph of that insurance registration card with your phone. It's going to be a better reference point than trying to write down a bunch of letters and numbers in an insurance policy. Again, take photographs. Take note if there's any video cameras in the area that might have recorded the accident. Make a report to the police, again, if applicable, and get medical treatment for your injuries. If you have questions about whether you have a claim, contact a lawyer. These are some general terms or aspects of an attorney-client relationship. One is the confidentiality that I mentioned earlier. Lawyers are ethically required to maintain confidentiality. What that means is that the content of your conversations is maintained confidential and only disclosed if it advances your interests. So once you establish an attorney-client relationship with an attorney, that attorney will then be acting in your interests and advancing your interests and not using information that you've shared with them against you. And the benefit of having a lawyer is that we are trained in our respective practices on how to apply the law and advise people on what their legal claims are, defenses, and rights. Again, you have the right to access and speak to attorneys, and then right to access courts, regardless of your immigration status. And most courts are also going to be required to provide language access, such as an interpreter. However, you may need to make a request. Again, that's something that a process that a lawyer could help lead you through. And if you just give me a moment, I am going to switch over to Mr. Antwine's materials here.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out how to do that, so I appreciate the assist.
Apparently I have not figured it out yet. Here we go. All right.
And then am I able to control this?
No, I don't. Well, let me see if I could try. I will see if I can. If you want to get started, I can.
Sure. Thanks. So thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Bridget and Ash. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. We're going to do an abrupt change here from workplace injuries and move into a discussion about immigration rights and responsibilities. You all know from the news that immigration is a hot topic in the United States currently. I would like to start out by saying that I think the level of press that this has gotten and the level of interest by the federal government has really created a scenario where people are scared. And that's really by design of this administration. So hopefully we can talk about ways to protect yourself, ways to assert your rights, and also ways to avoid coming under any ICE or DHS action. So I'd like to actually start off by talking about immigrant rights in public. Um, if you would move to that slide. So immigrant rights in public, what I'm referring to is I'm referring to the scenario where an ICE officer or another law enforcement officer comes up to you and engages you in some sort of conversation. I'm going to divide this into two separate scenarios. The first scenario is when someone who is undocumented, that is, someone who does not have a work authorization, does not have a green card, and does not have legal status in the United States. And then the second group, I'm going to talk about individuals who have documentation, are in legal status in the United States. So for those without documentation who are here without legal status, if you're approached in public, the best thing to do is to remain silent. You have the right under the Constitution to not say anything. What DHS or ICE officers are trying to prove when they interact with you is really three things. They're trying to elicit your name, your country of residence or country of birth, and also your immigration status. If those individuals are approaching you in public, they don't have any detailed information about you. So please don't give it to them. You have, again, the right to remain silent. I would encourage you not to provide your name, not to provide any sort of documentation, and not provide your country of birth. That doesn't necessarily protect you from being detained. Officers oftentimes will detain people anyway, but you need to assert that right and let the officer know that you intend to remain silent. There are protocols for officers where if they're not able to elicit basic information, they don't have the right to take you into police custody. So you would be asserting your rights to avoid that. For individuals with legal status in the United States who are approached by DHS or ICE agents, I actually suggest sharing that information. Engaging the officer, asking for verification that the officer is a DHS or ICE employee. They're able to show you a badge. Some of them carry a little certificate as well, so either of those are proof that they are representative of that agency. And then I would share with them the documents that you have. If that's a work authorization card, if that's a green card, if that's an OPT, work authorization card, you can provide that information to them. You're welcome to show an ID and show that card. What I would say is that immigration recently has taken a position that's distinct from what they've done in the past regarding those documents. So what they're saying now is that you always have to have on your person, that is in your possession, the valid work or lawful permanent residence card. And they expect to be shown that card if you're randomly stopped. I leave it to you to make that decision about whether to carry it or not. What I would suggest if you decide not to carry the physical card with you all the time for fear of losing it, I would recommend that you take a picture of it with your phone, have both sides of that document just saved as a picture on your phone to show the officers. Again, if you're in legal status, you may want to have photographs of your receipt notices and any pending applications you have with DHS as well. Oh, so good. So from the public space, we next sort of move into the employment space. And as an employee, working in a place of employment, right? Working in an office or on property, sort of the same rules apply. If you are an individual who is undocumented, you have the right to remain silent. If you're an individual with legal status, share that information. In the employment context, there are a couple distinctions that I want you to know and understand. One of the options as a documented individual, if you're approached by ICE at your workplace, is really to defer the ICE officials to your employer. You can say, my employer maintains those records. Speak to my employer. You may be able to introduce the ICE officer to your employer. But really passing that off is one option. The other option, as I mentioned, is simply to show them your documents. Again, if we're talking undocumented individuals, again, you're welcome to remain silent. Don't share your name, your country of birth, or your legal status. In the workplace, there are a couple different rules as well. And these dovetail with both the public space and the private space that I'm going to talk about next as it relates to your home. In the employment setting, Immigration and Customs Enforcement does not have the legal right to enter private property without certain documentation, without a warrant to do so. They are able to go into an employment situation, an employee situation, and talk to employees in public space. So the best example that I can come up with for this is, truly an American example. But, if you work at McDonald's, for example, the individuals behind the counter are technically in private space. The individuals, while they're working in the seating area where the tables are cleaning up, are in public space. So if you're in front of the counter, then an ICE official is able to stop you potentially and ask you these questions. If you are behind the counter in the kitchen in private space, then ICE officers do not have the ability to access and approach you. That's not to say they wouldn't find other ways to do that, but in that direct setting, they don't have the right to do that. So good. And that sort of leads me, that private space element really leads me to my next slide, which has to do with immigration coming to your home. As it stands, immigration has no ability to enter your home without your authorization. Um, the only way they can do it without your authorization is if they have a federal judge sign a search warrant to enter your property. And so if sort of regardless of status, whether you're documented or undocumented, if an ICE officer knocks on your door, or if someone knocks on your door and you don't know who it is, and you look out the window and see it's someone in a law enforcement vest with ICE or DHS listed on their jacket, you do not have to answer the door. You have no obligation to engage with that individual. If an ICE or DHS officer pounds on your door, screams at you, says open the door, I would suggest that you ask the officer if they have a warrant to enter your house. You can imagine with the immigration situation now, and we've seen this in the news, that there are very aggressive tactics. Some of the officers will say, yes, I have a warrant. Don't believe them. Ask them to show you the warrant. Ask them to slide the warrant under your door. Ask them to pass it through a window that you open a crack. Whatever it is, you need to examine that warrant and make sure it has the appropriate address on it, which would be for your home, that it has the appropriate name on it, which would be your or a family member or occupant's name. And it needs to have a signature at the bottom of it. And that's the key point. It would have to have a signature from a federal court judge. And in fact, that warrant at the very top would have to say the federal court district that it was issued in. I can tell you that most ICE agents do not have this. It just is not something that's easy to get. And most ICE agents believe that they have plenary authority to do what they want. And they do indeed use, trickery in trying to get people to open the door and speak to them. Once that door is open and once an individual steps out of their home, they're then in public space, and it makes it easier for the officer to ascertain information about them and potentially detain them. So, so it's key really to examine that document, make sure it's accurate, and make sure they have the authority to do what they want to do or what they say they have the right to do. If you do not get a warrant, or if that warrant looks suspicious, you can tell the officer that to come back the next day or to come back later, and that you intend to speak with your lawyer about that document. So you do have some rights when it pertains to your home. The sort of downside is if that is a valid document, if it does have the signatures, if it does have your name on it, there really is little that can be done at that stage. You would have the right to either remain silent and not interact with the ICE officials anymore, or potentially at that stage give them the right to enter your home. Again, I can't harp on this enough. ICE agents generally do not have the appropriate document to enter your home, so be very cautious and examine the document clearly. So good. That actually leads to my final topic, which is very specific and a very recent sort of initiative by the US government, by DHS. And it pertains primarily to students and more particularly to students on OPT, as well as H-1B visa holders who are employed and working with maybe a college or university or private employer. And what we've seen over the course of the last 3 weeks alone is that USCIS, even for people with these valid visa statuses, the USCIS is sending out investigators to verify that the information presented in the original visa application is correct. So I'll put this in the context of an F1 OPT student. That F1 OPT student might have gone to university, graduated, gotten their degree. They get a 12 or 24-month work authorization. That 12 or 24-month work authorization has a designated employer. And that designated employer has to be, or that employer has to be designated by the university when they prepare those documents. The DHS is going out to those employment sites, and they are verifying that those individuals on OPT or H-1B status are at those work sites, that they are engaged in the work that they said they would be doing on their original visa applications. So maybe the better example here is an H-1B visa, where you have to provide really extensive information about your qualifications for a job, the availability of the job, and the offer of employment for that job. The DHS is going out and investigating the terms placed on those visa applications. And again, asking very, very, excuse me, very detailed questions of the visa applicants. Um, if you find yourself in this situation where you're interacting, where you're in lawful status, you're interacting with one of these DHS officers who've come to investigate the terms of your visa and whether you're complying with those terms. Sort of the same rules apply that we've already talked about. Um, so number one is sort of verifying the identity of the DHS officer, potentially asking that DHS officer to speak with your employer because they have information related to that visa application. Um, Asking the individual to come back at a later date when both your employer, you, and the investigator can sit down and have a safe and reasonable conversation about it. And that also gives you time to review your old application and make sure you are complying with those terms. I think the key in these situations, when you're being in legal status and there's a subsequent investigation, is really to be honest and to provide as much information and as clear of information as you can to that officer. Um, Fortunately for the cases that my office has seen, we haven't seen any negative action taken against OPT or H-1B holders at this stage. We have seen investigations as to the workplace. Those investigations and those interviews and conversations have lasted about a half hour to 45 minutes as they gather information, but it hasn't resulted in the denial of the visa or the discontinuation of that visa. We'll sort of see where this goes. This is a relatively new program. And once again, it's really based on the administration's overall perspective that there is fraud in these applications. So um, that is all I have for this afternoon. I hope that's helpful. I think both Brooke and I are willing to answer some general questions about our subject areas. As Bridget mentioned earlier, I think it is key not to not to ask questions related to you personally at this stage. It really is just a general question and answer session. And Bridget, maybe you can provide some instruction on how to ask those questions, whether it's through the chat or on screen.
Yeah, so I was first going to ask how, if folks do have specific questions about their certain situations, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, we are certainly available by phone, email, fax. I will drop my contact information into the chat if everybody will have access to that.
And
And
we can be sure to share that information with everyone as well. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, and as Stephen and Brooke have both alluded to, you know, they are here to support you. You do have confidentiality in communicating with them, and they would be more than happy to speak with you about your personal situations, but that this platform is not the time for that. With that said, if anyone does have questions about the content, if you're tuning in from home, you can feel free to unmute yourself or drop a question in the chat. If you are here at the Midstate office and if you would like support from one of your teachers or classmates to help unmute, and you can ask the question that way, or if you would prefer to leave a question in the chat, that's also acceptable. And we have about 10 to 15 minutes if anyone does have questions. But if not, we will just say a big thank you to both Brooke and Stephen for sharing your time with us today, for sharing such important information. And I'll just reiterate again that they are trusted lawyers who I hope that if you have any questions that you will reach out to them directly. It looks like Ash just stepped out to make sure if there are any questions in the classroom, she's checking in there. So we'll give it just a minute or two. But again,
Yeah,
thank you so
may
much.
I, may I ask a question? Hi, my name is Victoria. Yeah, and I have maybe like a real stupid question, but I notice that I do not really understand like my status because sometimes I need to answer, for instance, like in a statement or in a questionnaire, am I residents or non-residents? And I don't really understand like who I am because I have J2 visa. Like I live here with my husband, and I also have a job permit. Uh, like, but I do not have a job here. So what is like my legal status? Because sometimes I do not really know what to like how to answer this question.
Yeah, so it sounds like you would be in status currently, assuming your visa is valid, right? And I have no reason to
Yeah.
think it wouldn't be, right? As long as your visa is valid, you would be a J1 visa holder. That a J1 visa is a non-immigrant visa, meaning you do not have lawful permanent residency. You're here for a fixed period on that visa category.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you.
We do have a question here in the chat that asks, is there a good resource to determine what is a public versus private space? For example, is an elementary school a public space?
Hmm. Yeah, that's really the question that courts have to answer. Generally, a public versus a private space is delineated by barriers, by notices, and by general access. So, um, is an elementary school a public space? Probably it is, in many aspects. However, those public spaces can be mitigated again, by limiting access with like a key card or just a key and a closed door. They can be limited with notices out in front of the building that say, this is not a public space, no public access, which would render that space non-public. Even though there are lots of kids in the school, and even though those kids come from a variety of locations, it doesn't necessarily make it public. Um, they are granted specific access to that space, and they're granted access to pursue their education. And with, again, notices, with doors, with restricted access, that can very easily become a non-public space. Yes.
Want to comment that that is such a good question from Room B. It has
Yep.
been subject to our U.S. Supreme Court
Yeah.
to try and answer that question. So it's a very good question.
And I'll
I would,
add that if you are in the Mid-State Literacy Council office with us right now, you might notice that we have some signs on our doors, the door to my office, the doors to classrooms, indicating that those are private spaces.
Good.
Whereas our front lobby area is more open to the public and could be considered a public space.
Perfect.
Any other questions from folks at home or from folks here in our office, in our classrooms, reminding you that these are general questions, not about your particular personal status or experiences. I'm not seeing or hearing anything, so I will just extend yet another big thank you to Brooke and Stephen. And we do have one more question in the chat here. Should someone carry their passport if they don't have other ID?
I generally recommend that you have some sort of original ID with you at all times. If your only identification is your passport, then you should have access to that, either the original on you or, as I mentioned earlier, photos of it, and to have some sort of access to it. So yes.
Another question coming in here, is EAD or work permit enough to carry as a proof that one can work in the US, or state ID is mandatory?
So a work authorization is considered an identity document for the purposes of the IRS. So you are able to use a work authorization document to work in any state. It's generally accepted as an identity document by most local law enforcement. That doesn't preclude the law enforcement officer from asking for a state ID or a passport. But that is at the discretion of the officer, certainly.
Great questions. I do want to stall just a bit in case anyone is thinking through their questions. This is valuable time that we have with our lawyers here. And it looks like Ash may be checking in on some of the classrooms just to assess.
Perfect.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add on to, just on the topic of taking photographs, would be also if an ICE officer does show you something that they claim to be a warrant, take a photograph of that.
Yep.
Take a photograph of that as well, to document what it is and show somebody later, if needed.
Good advice.
So one more question here on that same note, Stephen. Does that mean it is not mandatory to get state ID until one has EAD?
So there's no requirement in the state of Pennsylvania that you get a state ID. For most visa classes, and a work authorization is actually required in order to get a state ID. So I think to answer your question, I don't think in most cases regarding your immigration status, you're able to get a state ID unless you get an EAD or a work authorization. The city of Philadelphia does issue city IDs, for example, to individuals regardless of their immigration status. So I guess that would be an exception. But to answer your question, it is not mandatory to get a state ID, and at any point, frankly. So, yep. All right.
All right. Well, if no one has any other questions, again, thank you to Brooke and Stephen. We're so grateful. Oh, Ash is saying wait, but she might not know that her mic isn't working.
Oh,
Now it is.
okay.
Just in time.
One of our students in one of the rooms was wondering, what is the benefit of not cooperating with ICE? Why is it best to sometimes not just immediately fork over information?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the underlying status of that individual. So we've delineated this as to those with documentation and valid visa status in the United States versus those who are undocumented. If you are undocumented, and if you're undocumented in the United States, in order to be removed or deported from the United States, the government has to prove 4 things against you. They have to prove that you're not a US citizen, that you do not have valid visa status, and they also have to identify a country for you to be removed to. And they have to acknowledge the violation of the immigration laws that apply to you. And so they have to prove those elements. And if they're just walking up to someone on the street, for example, they don't know that an individual walking down the street is here without status. By cooperating with them and providing your name, your country of birth, and your status, you've just given the 3 pieces of information to the Department of Homeland Security that they require to have you removed from the United States. Again, if you remain silent, they might take you in nonetheless, but you'd be able to challenge that through the court process, through what's called a motion to suppress. So if someone in the United States, regardless of their immigration status, asserts their right to remain silent, any undue pressure on that is deemed a constitutional violation. And so we would then argue those facts in court to have that information removed from the record. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you to Ash for checking in on all of our classrooms here. All right. Well, with that, I will thank you once again. Thank you so much to Brooke and Stephen for being here. Again, I encourage you to our students here and community members that if you do have questions about immigration rights, workplace rights, please reach out to them. We will be happy to share their information. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bridget.